in Africa to take, I think, 1,300 people from West Africa to Mecca. You can't just be in the jungle eating bananas, not having no language and have no organization to take 1,300 people. Y'all can't get 4 people on the road trip to figure out what restaurant y'all go to on Friday night. It takes organization, it takes coordination. You have to have supplies, you have to have free time. You cannot be a group of people who have subsistence living where you're just trying to find something to eat every day. You're going to take that kind of journey. Okay? Matter of fact, Mansa Musa was head of Mali when they built one of the world's oldest universities, the University of Sankore, in a place called Timbuktu. You can look it up. Everything I say is what I call Google fileable. You can verify it by Google. If you're allergic to textbooks, you can use your technology. Okay? The reason why I tell you this about the University of Sankore in Timbuktu is because you have to understand that getting a university or college education is nothing new to our communities. This is what we do. Okay? We build schools, we work in schools, we create these kinds of things. It's not new to us. Then we had a low period. Most human beings have low periods. Unfortunately, within human history, people have enslaved one another from various groups. Enslavement has come in a variety of forms, but it's a process. We were enslaved in the Western Hemisphere. Most people from Africa were in the Caribbean or Central and South America. And then you had a population that came to North America at the time that the colonies eventually became the United States of America. We came out of the enslavement period and we thought that we were going to get free, and we had some marginal success for about 10 years to a place called Reconstruction, but then we went through a low period called the Nadir. And that lasted about 100 years. So about 100 years after enslavement, there was law, de jure and de facto. There was customs and traditions and norms that kept black people disenfranchised through terrorism, and that's why you see the picture of the lynching. Lynching was part of a strategy to keep people in their place. So when you talk about what's wrong with black people, y'all been free from slavery for this many years, y'all, you keep lynching a whole bunch of people, shooting them, killing them, Emmett Till's, Trayvon Martin. That's not an impact. Tulsa. You act like we got free, and they was like, oh, hey, what's up, my brothers and sisters? And white brothers and sisters came up, we was having parties together, we all went and opened up businesses. Right? That didn't happen. But that's what people fought. A multicultural group of people fought. Led the civil rights movement, which led to the women's rights movement, which led to the LGBT movement, which led to wonderful Chicano liberation movement. All kinds of movements came out of that. 70s, 80s brought the rise of the hip-hop generation, and then also received the capping of contemporary history as symbolized by the rock. But you have to understand this. And that what I'm talking about is part of a continuum of history. Right? If you start your history here, this means something different versus if you start your history here. Okay? And that's a whole other discussion we have. But the part of history I want to talk about is the Black Freedom Movement, which led to contemporary time. Because this is going to give you context when we're talking about the vote. The Black Freedom Movement, in my estimate, and you can argue with me all those social sciences, really started with the killing of Emmett Till in Money, Mississippi in 1955. Because when he was killed in August of 1955, a young man, 14-year-old boy from Chicago, went down to visit his family in Mississippi. Because if you don't know, all the damn black people in Chicago, they're from Mississippi. Just like all the black people over here, it's from Texas and Louisiana, they're from Mississippi over here. And he went down to visit his family, and he went to the store with his cousin, and he either winked, whistled, or asked this white woman out on a date. Either one of those three things. I don't know who in this room thinks that any of those three acts are punishable by death, but her husband did. Okay? Took him out of his uncle's house, beat him to a pulp, shot him, then tied a cotton gin fan to his neck and threw him in the Tallahatchie River. When his body was found, they wanted to desperately have a closed casket funeral because this is how he looked. This is how he looked before, this is how he looked after. His mother, Mamie Till, said, no, I want the world to see what they did to my baby. Okay? And this happened in August of 55. December of 55, a young seamstress in Montgomery, Alabama said, I am not getting up my seat. Now, the popular narrative is that she was just tired. That's nice. Good story. It sounds good. It's like Santa Claus. A guy comes and just give you gifts and you don't even know it. Right? That's a wonderful story. Right? But she was she's secretary of the NAACP. This was a strategy. She wasn't the only person that was not doing PC, but she was a person that they can do a test case with. E.D. Nixon was the organizer in Montgomery, Alabama. Okay? E.D. Nixon was the head of the NAACP in Montgomery, Alabama. But for some reason, the people didn't want E.D. Nixon to run the movement in Alabama, so they created a new organization called the Montgomery Improvement Association. It was mostly made up of local leaders, and it was also made up of not young, but preachers. And what happened was a lot of people had already been in this community for a long time. They had a brand new guy who was a young preacher from Atlanta who had just got his doctorate from Boston. And he was like, you know what, if this boycott thing don't work, we don't want to deal with it, but what about the young boy? Let's put the young boy in charge. The young boy they put in charge of a 26-year-old Martin Luther King Jr. Martin Luther King Jr. was an organic leader. He came from the people. He was on the margins. And they said, we need somebody to run the Montgomery Improvement Association. We don't want to put our necks on the line. How about this young dude? Come on, 26-year-old Martin Luther King Jr. And Martin Luther King led the movement, and people pretty much have a general understanding of this history. We're not going to go in depth. And then his movement always had a parallel, radical, and or militant wing, right? This was symbolized in history by Malcolm X, right? Malcolm X with the Nation of Islam, Malcolm X outside of the Nation of Islam, right? Who had a different kind of argument than Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King was saying we need to get rid of these messages that are creating barriers within our society, and we all need to live as a society within brotherhood. Malcolm X said we can't live together in brotherhood without keep forcing and asking the community that keeps terrorizing us and keeps discriminating against us, we need to own our own, right? That was his argument. And this resonated with some young people. And these young people became student leaders. They started stuff like SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, FOR, and all these various civil rights-based organizations, symbolized by this man here at the time known as Stokely Carmichael, but later in his life changed his name to Kwame Ture. Right? And these people began to become very engaged. And they began to ignite people even on the West Coast. In Oakland, California, in October 1966, something was called the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense was created. And so all of these things took place under the context of challenging this system, right? Legal and cultural, of disenfranchising populations. And you know, these kind of arguments were being made by people like Malcolm X that were saying things like this. Say it, Malcolm.
We are Africans, and we happen to be in America. We're not Americans. We are people who formerly were Africans who were kidnapped and brought to America. Our forefathers weren't the pilgrims. We didn't land on Plymouth Rock. The rock was landed on us.
Denzel Washington didn't make that up, bro.
We were brought here against our will. We were not brought here to be made citizens. We were not brought here to enjoy the constitutional gifts that they speak so dearly about today. Because we weren't brought here to be made citizens today, now that we've become awakened to some degree and we begin to ask for those things which they say are supposedly for Americans, they look upon us with hostility and unfriendliness.
And that's very important, that line. He said, we're asking for things that were supposed to be given to us as citizens. The thing about Martin Luther King Jr. is that he was just going to the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. Martin Luther King wasn't speaking from the Communist Manifesto. He said, this document, I'm just asking y'all to do what's in the paperwork, right? I'm just asking you to do what's in the paperwork. And it was met with so much resistance. And it's very interesting, and it's kind of what's going on in contemporary society with the kind of resistance people are just saying, just don't shoot me, just arrest me. And then people just say, I'm going to shoot you more. I'm just telling you to just do what you said you were going to do. But this kind of analysis and all of the civil rights activity, there was a response. And the response wasn't, yes, you're right. This is what our documents say. This is what we stand for, right? The response was, no, we have to stop you. This is very important, that communities within the government said, we want to be fully recognized as citizens and exercise the ability to be citizens and all that that means. Right? And the government said, no, nah. That's a very interesting thing. And most of the work was done in the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The Federal Bureau of Investigation created an organization called the Counterintelligence Program, popularly known as COINTELPRO. This is an exhaustive description of it, but the most important thing is that it started initially with McCarthyism when they were having the House Committee on Un-American Activities, where we were trying to find communists. And then eventually the Supreme Court ruled in 56-57 that these committees questioned the constitutionality of the Smith Act, prosecutions, and subversive activities, control board hearings. The FBI response to was COINTELPRO. Could no longer just prosecute people when you thinking they're socialists or communists. And counterintelligence program is a program designed to, quote, neutralize those who could no longer be prosecuted. Over the years, similar programs were created to neutralize civil rights, anti-war, and many other groups, many of which were said to be communist front organizations. One of the reasons to be combative with Martin Luther King, Elijah Muhammad, Kwame Ture was to say that they were communists. Okay? And the counterintelligence program, which is very important to the discussion that I'm going to talk about, had they had 41 field offices. And this is a memo, and everything I talk about, I'll cite my sources, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm a scholar. The counterintelligence program is now being expanded to include 41 offices. This is from a field memo in 65. For maximum effectiveness of the counterintelligence program and to prevent the wasted effort of long-range goals. Now check this out. Number one, prevent the coalition of militant black nationalist groups. They use the term militant black nationalist groups. Very interesting, because they said militant black nationalist groups, but then you see who's naming here. Martin Luther King. How many people ever thought Martin Luther King was a militant black nationalist? No, anybody who was challenging the system, they was all under one umbrella. We over here talking about Malcolm versus Martin. FBI said, nah, all of them. They the same thing to us. They won't change. Prevent the rise of a messiah who could unify and electrify the militant black nationalist movement. Malcolm X might have been such a messiah. He is the martyr of the movement today. Malcolm had been killed in February of '65. Martin Luther King, Stokely Carmichael, and Elijah Muhammad all aspired to the position. Elijah Muhammad is less of a threat because of his age. King could be very well contended for this position should he abandon his post of obedience to the white liberal doctrines of nonviolence and embrace black nationalism. Carmichael has the necessary charisma to be a real threat in this way. We all know that Stokely Carmichael eventually moved to Africa, went into exile, and Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated in April 1968. 3, prevent violence on the part of black nationalist groups. 4, prevent militant black nationalist groups and leaders from gaining respectability. Responsible Negro community. We can talk about responsible Negroes at another time. Second must be discredited is the white community, both responsible community and the liberals. The third must be discredited in the eyes of Negro radicals. A final goal should be to prevent the long-term growth of militant black national organizations, especially among who? Among young people, right? Discredit. Make fun of them. Make it funny to love your culture and to challenge the system, right? So that's what we've been seeing in movies from like the 70s on to the black exploitation. The pro-black person with the red, black, green flag is always a buffoon, a fool, or a fraud, right? They're always trying to hustle somebody, okay? And this is another memo which is very important. The Negro youth and moderate must be made to understand that if they succumb to revolutionary teaching, they will be dead revolutionaries. Is it not better to be a sports hero, a well-paid professional athlete and entertainer, regularly paid white or blue-collar worker than a Negro who may have gotten into the establishment or gained from being all these people that hatred and distrust of national music? So, what does all this have to do with voting rights? Voting Rights Act happened in '65. This kind of operation takes place in '65. All right? And there are people within segments of the government who are saying we're going to control particular populations. And we're going to basically discredit people. They threw Martin Luther King in there with everybody else, with the Panthers and everybody else. We're going to discredit them and keep them from participating, keep them from engaging, keep them from challenging us on our privilege. So to act as if people have been on this track historically unmolested, undetoured, and we just woke up one day like Bill Cosby said and was not being productive, that's problematic. One of the books you can get this from is the COINTELPRO papers, Ward Churchill and Jim Vanderwall, and another one is The Dangers of Dissent, the FBI and Civil Liberties in 1965. And there's a whole bunch of text that's on the internet. You can also go to the Freedom of Information Act. But let me show you how deep this is and how deep this was. I'm going to show you this clip, and it's from a real live, actual FBI informant who was interviewed on an ABC special in New York City by Gil Noble at a show called Tell It Like It Is. And he did a series. And you can find this on YouTube. This is YouTube. And he did a series on COINTELPRO and its impact on the black community. But check this out and see if any of this stuff doesn't resonate with the audience.
Yes, I've seen them going over even video portions of cultural events. The understanding, like when, okay, you have an organization like Leroy Jones Black House. You remember that? Okay, Leroy Jones, which was done on the thing of tribalism. That's where I first heard the word kin to, mom to, hun to, kin to. These words, the African continuum. I heard that from Asian. He ran it down. They think in their study of the personality of the people in the too, culture. It always helps. You can take their culture and use it against them.
How large would you say extensive a collection on our culture would you say the FBI has to do? Rate as large as a particular library, like the Schomburg Library in Harlem?
I would rate it better. I would rate it better. I think that they go into detail. Details that we probably overlook. Will Eaton used to meet me in different places. Will Eaton, that was one of my supervising agents. There was a certain bar in the Los Angeles area where people went to Black cultural things went. And Will Eaton used to meet me there. And he would go into very long and tiring conversations with some very articulate brothers about culture, African culture, and Afro-American culture.
Tell me about some of the cultural organizations that you have prepared for what you did.
TAFLA, Monday, Black Writers Workshop, which they had a
Black
lot.
Writers Workshop.
Yes. Black Writers Workshop, one of the oldest Black Writers Workshop.
Black Writers Workshop.
Yeah. Bureau head.
How do you know?
And then he goes on and on and tells how he burned the place down and with his role. Y'all want to know where to watch that video? You'll know we're going to a pro house, FBI sabotage black men. So that's my part about the response, the government response to black civil rights movement. Under and unemployment. There's two major textiles that I recommend called The Working Poor and When Work Disappears. There used to be a time in this country where you had a high school diploma or not, and you were able to go and work for a job for almost 30, 40 years, whether it was at Donald Douglas, whether it was at Goodyear, Ford, or what have you. While you're working, you're able to possibly get a home, put your children through college, and that was the experience. That doesn't happen anymore, right? High school diploma is like having nothing in some cases, okay? But there's an interesting thing with William Julius Wilson's argument is about the working, I'm going to talk about the people who are not only when work disappears, the world of the new urban poor. What he's saying is that people have been poor in the inner cities for the longest, but they haven't been not working. Most people were working and poor. So he's talking about what does that mean? And his study was based in Chicago. He said, by the new poverty, I mean poor, segregated neighborhoods in which a substantial majority of the individual adults are either unemployed or have dropped out of the labor force altogether. In 1950, 69% of all males 14 and over who lived in the Bronzeville neighborhood worked in a typical week. In 1960, 64% of this group were employed. However, by 1990, only 37% of all males 16 and over held jobs in a typical week in these three neighborhoods. Okay? So this creates an entire different issue. It's one thing to be poor, but having a place to go to every day or every night to exercise your labor. But when you have no labor to exercise, a whole lot of things can happen within communities. Okay? And then we're not going to even talk about the statistics as far as livable wage. That's something else we'll talk about. But check this out.
Jobs will be big issues in Washington in this country. Unemployment among the general population is 9.1%. It is 16.2% for African Americans, and higher still for African American males. Michelle Miller has more on what's being done to try to turn those figures around.
Once It's crunch time, it's dry. A job training program at East Harlem with drill sergeant-like instruction.
That's another photo from that stadium there.
Say yes.
No, give my 75 cents for it.
For young men of color, especially black males, unemployment is at Depression-era-like levels. Nationwide, black male unemployment is at 17.5%. In New York City, it's 25%. And according to think tank the Community Service Society, a third of New York's young black men aged 19 to 24 are not working.
No, I'm not working at the moment.
20-year-old Christopher Scott, a high school dropout, got a GED last year, but he hasn't been able to find a job ever since.
It makes me feel a little degraded in a way because I feel like I'm supposed to be more independent at the age of 12.
For those with less than a college education, finding a job alone isn't enough. Even if they do secure employment, it's often at a rate below minimum wage. In places like New York City, barely enough to survive.
So that's the importance of education. The deterioration of public education can be recognized in this period.
When I was going to school, 8 or 900 students come in the same grades.
Listen to this.
By the time your 10th grades, it's down to 545 students. By the time they reach 11th grade, it's down to 345 students. When the same cohort reach from grade, it's 245 students. And by then, you have to take a high school test, a lead test, before when your members, minimum competencies. 11 students, 11 pass the lead test. What are the other 780 students that we do for employment? The economics of poverty have devastated Detroit, and without a successful public education system, like most of the urban centers, we're not going to make it.
And so what happens is that the poor, it becomes a crime to be poor, right? And so we watched the clip earlier that talked about Nixon's war on drugs. And we've been dealing with this war on drugs not only since then, but also this special era of the invasion of this thing that's called crack cocaine. And crack cocaine has given our community a little bit more than our favorite rapper and our favorite TV show. And people seem to not associate it with the devastation that it's caused communities and caused generations of people. Because we have famous rappers who we call trap rappers, who say, before I rapped, I sold cocaine. Now I just rap about selling cocaine. And you buy it like it's cocaine. And some of the best TV shows, crime shows, take place in these deteriorating areas. But this whole phenomenon of the war on drugs has been analyzed and scrutinized by certain scholars, one of them being Michelle Alexander. Raise your hand if you ever heard of Michelle Alexander. Okay, she wrote a book called The New Jim Crow. And she makes an argument. And this is pretty much the key point of my discussion about what has happened 50 years since the Voting Rights Act. She said that we couldn't disenfranchise people by law based on race after we had the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. So we had to find other ways to utilize them, because if you won, the 13th Amendment ends in slavery. It ends slavery in America, except if you're what? If you're in prison. If you're incarcerated, you can be enslaved, basically. All right, people don't realize that. Read the 13th Amendment. It's in this document called the Constitution. Easily accessible. All right, use your library card. But also, she talks about how it disenfranchises you. You can't vote. You can't live in public housing, and all these things that go in. But check out her statistics on this book right here.
Yes, thanks largely to the war on drugs, a war that has been waged almost exclusively in poor communities of color. Even though studies have consistently shown that people of color are no more likely to use or sell illegal drugs than whites. The war on drugs waged in these ghetto communities condition of benefits, much like their grandparents or great-grandparents may have been discriminated against during the Jim Crow era.
So basically what she's saying is that the more things have changed, the more things have stayed the same. They've created different mechanisms to provide similar barriers that institutions have known. If you want to know more about crack cocaine and its impact on our community, there's a wonderful movie that came out last year called Kill the Messenger. It follows a guy named Gary Webb. Gary Webb was a writer for the San Jose Mercury newspaper who discovered the link between CIA, Freeway Ricky Ross here in Los Angeles, and that whole network. It's a feature length. I couldn't believe they made a feature length film about it, but you gotta see it. It's a hell of a movie. Kill the Messenger, 2014. And so what happens is these populations have been created as criminals, and what happens is people start to celebrate it, embrace it as an identity, right? And so the identity becomes, you know, I'm a thug, I'm a G, I'm hard, my masculinity is totally based on my ability to navigate and negotiate the rough urban terrain. And my ability as a woman is only to navigate, negotiate all of this hostility, and at the same time, live some kind of life of pleasure and comfort, hopefully from some kind of quote-unquote baller, right? And so now, those become the measures of success. Am I able to live outside of the law, be an outlaw, and still be able to acquire the accoutrements that says that I'm successful through luxury items and purchases, and then can I find me a man who can provide those things for me, right? And so you start to come with these labels of thugs and N-word and thought and every other kind of word imaginable, other than human being, right? And what happens is you begin to label people, and as you begin to label people, you don't have to recognize their humanity as much. All right? And so look at this exchange. This is on repeat on my computer for about a week, because this kind of shows what's going on. I'm going to explain to you. So what happened was a man named Freddie Gray was in police custody. And once he got out of police custody, his spine had been severed, his voice box had been crushed, and he was dead. Now, they say this is a mystery because the police don't know how, when they picked him up in the van, and how when he got out, he ended up dead. They have no explanation. One of the strongest explanations is that he did it to himself, because you know how easy it is for you to sever your own spine. You know, we all have done it at some point. And so, this man died, was in the hospital for a week. During this whole week, 6 days, they had been protesting in the city of Baltimore, so-called peaceful protests, marching a whole bunch of times. No violence, no cameras, basically wasn't happening to the eyes of the world. Last Saturday, the same kind of peaceful march that they've been doing for a week happens to coincide with an Orioles game. Not only the Orioles versus the Red Sox. And as the marchers got to downtown, some of the drunk people who were at the bars downtown began to yell racial epithets and throw beer at these people. And then a fight started, and the fight led to all of the other types of damages that you see that took place. And so one of the first things that happened was the mayor came out, called people who was looting and riot thugs and hoodlums and criminals. And then Barack Hussein Obama came out and said, hell, they thugs, they criminals, let's keep this thing going. And so CNN, and now we know how much CNN cares about CVS's. Before I didn't know I didn't care about CVS. But CNN loved them some CVS's. They ain't worried about no separate spine. But you mess with a CVS, and CNN's gonna get you. Okay? And so check this out, because they're interviewing the city councilman. And the city councilman is an older gentleman, very composed. But even he has his limits of this kind of narrative that people are trying to tell.
The mayor of Baltimore, who's come under a lot of criticism, stated criticism for her handling of this, referred to people who were doing this last night as thugs. And she got a lot of criticism for that. There were people I saw on Twitter saying, why would you call them thugs? Then they're not going to listen to you. President Obama also called the protesters, in his words, say, quote-unquote, criminals and thugs. He also carefully chose to use that word. Isn't it the right word?
No, of course it's not the right word to call our children thugs. These are children who have been set aside, marginalized, who have not been engaged by us. No, you don't have to call
But how does
them
that
thugs.
justify what they did? I mean, that's a sense of right or wrong. They know it's wrong to steal and run down CVS and affect the person's home. I mean,
watch that. While I pray, go to bed, I watch that. This is amazing. He just snapped. Because what he's saying is, look, young people are behaving badly. We don't want to label them or categorize them. Right? People say, well, no, this is what they're doing. Hard news. They know what they're doing. Now, we know America is not immune to riots. After the University of Kentucky lost the Final Four game, people in Kentucky tore up a whole bunch of stuff. No one called those young people thugs, criminals, whatever. Stanley Cup had one of the worst, riots in the history of North America in Canada after, I forgot which team lost, and they burned up everything, broke it. They had at Huntington Beach at the surfing competition. It happens in various communities. But when it happens in those communities, it's young people blowing off steam. No one talks about the businesses if they don't have insurance. I'm sure CVS had some kind of insurance policy, right? It's an international global pharmaceutical chain. But when it happens in our communities, there's a certain kind of label. And it's very interesting because if you were to think about this, a young white guy in Sanford, Florida, in a gated community, walking with a hooded shirt on, the night of the NBA All-Star game, with Skittles and a Sprite in his hand, would George Zimmerman look at that young white boy and think of him as a criminal, chase him down and gun him down? You have to answer the question. A young black guy in Ferguson, a young white guy in Ferguson, Missouri, walking with his friend, walking across the street, would the police first interaction would have been, get the F out the street? And then it would have ended in an exchange where he ended up shot and dead. That's why Toni Morrison said what she said. They asked her, what does she think about equality in America? She said, talk to me about equality in America when an unarmed white teenager is killed by the police. Because it doesn't happen. Even armed teenagers don't get killed by the police. Remember the young man who shot everybody in Colorado in the movie theater? They knew he had a gun because he had killed a whole bunch of people. It wasn't even, was it a gun or not? He was arrested. Jerry McLaughlin, I think his name was, in Arizona, who shot a congressperson in the head, he was arrested. These are people that are armed. They're getting arrested. So, it's because of the narrative. It's because they're thugs, they're outside society, they don't need to be protected. Because of this entire chain of events that I just talked about. And so when we talk about identity, we talk about culture, right? It's not just about going back into pride, having natural hair, putting up a fist, wearing African clothing. Because Dr. John Henry Clark said to be black and beautiful means nothing less for black and powerful. And Dr. Amos Wilson says cultural continuity is maintained by educating children in the ways of their culture, and they are educated in the ways of their culture to maintain their culture, to advance its interest, and ultimately to try to maintain its survival. That is the fundamental reason people are educated. And he goes on to say the ultimate function of education is to secure the survival of people. The reason why I'm saying that is because we are under the impression that cultural identity is to look back on old history and old historical events and not be able to talk about how they're relevant today. And we also talk about preserving traditions that people did or used to do as if it has relevance today. We have to examine what's going on in our communities, and things have to speak to what's going on today. And so my primary cultural identity is not whether we go by African or African American or Black American or just American. It's about our primary identity is as a problem solver. That whatever your cultural identity is, it's linked to solving problems within the communities in which you live in. What are these problems I'm talking about? Health and wellness, economics, arts and culture, political empowerment, mass incarceration, police brutality, and of course, yes, education. What is the type of education that we are having in public schools, K through 12, and also secondary institutions? How are they preparing us for that? And if the educations are preparing us for that, and they're giving us a credential, how do we work outside the system to get this kind of education and partner with the credential? Because I'm going to tell you right now, when I talk to high school students and freshman students, I tell them, I love talking to high school and freshman students. I love it because you guys are on the cusp of something very interesting. Okay? Because right now, you go home, you open up the refrigerator, and you see what you can take out of it. But you're about to cross over. Because now you're going to walk in the refrigerator, open it up, and you got to what? Figure out what you're going to put in it. That's a different way of being in the world. That's a different reality. That's a different kind of responsibility. And we get the credentials so that we can meet the minimum qualifications to be able to put something in that refrigerator versus taking something out. But that doesn't mean that your education is limited to the credential that you secured. And this is the challenges that we face. We have to give ourselves permission to be great. Okay? Because there's been a shift over time. For my old school brothers and sisters in here, this is what we used to be afraid of. Not enough black heroes. Not enough black role models. So this is actually an ad from like a 1980s Black History Month thing for like some airline. I think it don't even exist anymore. It was like Northwest or Pan Am. They said, what's wrong with this picture? It was like the black boy looking back. But right now, that's not the issue. The issue is now the black boy looking in the mirror and this is what he's seeing back. Right? That's the image. It's not necessarily